Hello everyone, my name is Ava, and today I would like to tell you about a past that I can never forget. Every time I think about it, my heart is heavy and I can't stop blaming myself. It's a story I wish I hadn't lived, but life doesn't always make things easy. It all started many years ago when I was just 18 and living with my family in London. Such a beautiful city, but with its own hidden darkness. At the time, I thought I had everything. My family was well off, and both my parents were successful. My father was a busy businessman, and my mother was an accomplished interior designer. Despite their busy lives, they always made time for me and my two older twin brothers, Nathan and Jack. They were 2 years older than me, and if I had to describe them, I would say they were both incredibly charming and handsome. Frankly, I've always felt lucky to have them as brothers. Be sure to subscribe to my channel so I can continue to bring you more fascinating true stories like this one. And don't forget to watch this video to the end and like it, because this story is going to be incredibly interesting. Please hit the like button to show your support. As the youngest in my family, I was spoilt by my parents. They never allowed me to want for anything, whether it was material goods or affection. But to be honest, I always felt that no matter how much my parents loved me, it wasn't the same as the love Nathan and Jack gave me. They were more than just brothers. They were my protectors, always looking out for me. The way they loved me seemed deeper than my parents' love, because they always expressed it through actions and gestures that came from deep concern. My parents loved me by giving me a comfortable life, but Nathan and Jack did more. They really understood me in a way that my parents sometimes couldn't. When I was sad, they knew, even if I didn't say a word. They were always the ones I could confide in without fear of judgment. When I was younger, if I fell or was bullied at school, Nathan and Jack were the first to step in and defend me. Once I was made fun of by classmates because of a dress I was wearing, and when I came home crying, they didn't just comfort me. They went to the school to confront the children. They didn't use violence, but their sharp words and cold demeanor made sure those kids never bothered me again. They were like heroes to me, always ready to help whenever I needed them. I remember the evenings when our whole family would gather, but I always wanted to sit between Nathan and Jack. They'd put their arms around me, and sometimes they'd playfully argue about who should sit next to me. They used to joke about me, calling me their little princess, and vowing to protect me for the rest of their lives. As time went on, I began to realize that their love for me was different from that of the others. They were also the first to help me through my teenage insecurities. When I felt insecure about my appearance, Jack would spend evenings teaching me how to apply light makeup and reassuring me that I was beautiful just the way I was. Nathan helped me pick out clothes and always called me the sweetest little sister in the world. They made me feel cherished, and their love was something special in my eyes. They weren't just my brothers, they were my emotional rock. Whenever my parents were busy working, Nathan and Jack were the ones who took me to school, helped me with my homework, and made sure I never felt lonely. Late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I would knock on their door, and they would always greet me with a warm smile. Sometimes they would tell me funny stories or just sit with me until I drifted off to sleep. It was these little things that made me believe that their love for me was far greater than anything I had ever received from my parents. But that love, the one I believed to be pure and innocent, would eventually lead to a haunting experience that changed everything. I'm not sure anyone will really understand, but when I was 18, something happened that completely changed my life. I will tell you the rest when I find the strength to face that part of my memory. I remember it so clearly because we were so close. As the youngest in the family, I often did silly things without fear of being scolded. Sometimes I would suddenly jump up and give them a hug or casually sit on their laps when they were sitting somewhere. Nathan and Jack weren't just my brothers, they were my closest friends, people I never felt shy about showing affection to. One afternoon, a warm summer's day, I walked out of my bedroom. Sunlight streamed in through the large living room window, creating a peaceful atmosphere. Nathan and Jack were sitting on the sofa, concentrating on the television. I didn't know what they were watching, but they looked very engrossed. Without thinking, I approached them and rubbed my eyes. They didn't notice me approaching, so I mischievously jumped on the sofa and sat on their laps. At that moment, Nathan was startled and Jack burst out laughing. "Little sister, what are you doing?" I chuckled, said nothing, and sat comfortably on their laps, resting my head on Nathan's shoulder. "What are you two looking at so intently?" I asked, but didn't get an immediate answer. Looking at the screen, I realized it was a romantic film. And just then, the film was reaching its emotional climax. The two characters on the screen were embracing and sharing a passionate kiss. Seeing me staring at the screen, both Nathan and Jack became uncomfortable. Jack smiled shyly and quickly covered my eyes with his hand. "Don't look, Ava. This isn't a children's film." I laughed and tried to wriggle out of his grip. "I'm not a kid anymore. I'm 18, I teased, although I secretly found the scene quite interesting. I kept trying to look through Jack's fingers, laughing and teasing them at the same time. At that moment, I unconsciously moved my hand to balance myself on Jack's lap. Intentionally or not, my hand brushed against something in his pocket. The hard, warm sensation startled me, and my heart raced. I quickly pulled my hand away. I didn't dare look at Nathan or Jack. "I'm sorry," I stammered, then quickly stood up and ran to my room. I slammed the door behind me, my heart pounding. I sat on my bed, wondering what had just happened. The image of the remote in Jack's pocket kept replaying in my mind, making my face flush. Was I thinking too much, or was it an accident? I didn't know, but the shame and embarrassment remained, and I couldn't bring myself to leave my room. The thought of what Nathan and Jack might think of me kept me in my room, unable to shake the image that haunted me. It wasn't just the physical touch, but the uncomfortable realization that I had crossed a line I didn't even know existed between us. The closeness we shared seemed to have a fragile limit that I had never thought about before. That evening, after hiding in my room for a while, I decided to go down to the living room. I was getting hungry, and I knew that my family were probably waiting for me to join them for dinner. But the events of the afternoon were still fresh in my mind, and I felt a little embarrassed. I kept wondering if Nathan and Jack were thinking about what had happened. Then I reassured myself that maybe it wasn't as serious as I thought, and maybe they'd forgotten about it by now. I opened the door quietly and tiptoed down the hall, hoping not to meet their eyes. As I approached the living room, I paused to listen for any sounds. The room seemed empty, so I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking they were probably in the kitchen or somewhere else, not paying attention to me anymore. I tiptoed into the living room and looked around, afraid I'd catch their eye, but to my surprise, no one was there. How strange, I thought, stopping in front of the sofa where I had sat with them earlier that afternoon. I was still trying to figure out what channel was on the TV when suddenly, from behind, two faces leaned down, looking in the same direction as me. "What are you doing, Ava?" Jack's voice rang out right next to my ear, making me jump. Nathan laughed loudly from the other side and added, "You look like a thief." I let out a small cry of shock and turned to see them standing right behind me. Their sudden appearance nearly stopped my heart, and we all jumped at the same time. Jack and Nathan looked at me, then burst out laughing, while I could only hold my chest in fear and amusement. "Oh my God, you guys scared me to death," I said, pretending to be angry but unable to stop myself laughing. "I feel like I've just been teased," I added unexpectedly. "What about you?" "You look like you're up to something shady." Nathan raised his eyebrows and smiled mischievously. Jack patted my head teasingly. "You're not planning on eating anything, are you?" I laughed along with them. At that moment, the awkward tension of the afternoon seemed to disappear. I reassured myself that what I had touched earlier couldn't have been what I thought it was. Otherwise, they wouldn't be laughing like that. With that thought, I felt a small relief and tried to pretend that nothing had happened. "I was just, well, checking to see if anyone was here." I smiled brightly, trying to change the subject. "What are you two doing behind me, trying to scare me?" Jack shrugged, pretending to be serious. "Yeah, I just wanted to scare you a bit, but I didn't expect you to be so scared. Nathan added, his voice playful. Who would have thought you'd jump like that? Your face was priceless. We all burst out laughing. The atmosphere became lighter and happier. Just then, Nathan put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Okay, let's go eat. The whole family's waiting for you." I nodded, smiled, and followed him into the kitchen. The family was already gathered around the dining table. My parents smiled gently as they saw me come in, and I sat down, feeling the warmth of the kitchen and the peaceful, cozy environment. During the meal, the conversation was full of laughter. My parents talked about work, while Nathan and Jack occasionally teased me with light jokes. I joined in, and the feeling of embarrassment from earlier seemed to have disappeared completely. After dinner, I helped my mother with the dishes before going to my room to get ready for bed. As I lay in bed, I thought about the events of the afternoon and the teasing that had just taken place. Although I was still a little embarrassed, I was no longer afraid. I smiled to myself and reassured myself that everything would be fine. Nathan and Jack are still the best brothers I've ever had. With that, I fell asleep peacefully. Things weren't quite over the next morning. There was only a thin wall between my room and Nathan and Jack's, so even the smallest sounds like films or music could be heard. I was known for sleeping late, but this morning I woke up early at 7 a.m. At first I thought I was still dreaming, or perhaps the sunlight through the curtains was blinding me. But no, after a few minutes of waking, I realized there was a strange noise coming from the next room. My room was between Nathan's and Jack's. Our house had thin walls, so even the slightest sound travelled easily. I was used to hearing them playing or talking, but this time the sound was different. At first I assumed they were watching an action film, but the longer I listened, the more certain I became that something was wrong. The sound wasn't like typical film noise. There was a strange rhythm to it, sometimes long, sometimes short. My heart began to race, and a thought came to me that made my face turn red. I didn't want to believe it, but the sound became clearer. It wasn't music, and it wasn't just ordinary conversation. Even though the walls blocked the sound, I could still hear rapid, sensual sounds mixed with heavy breathing. I tried to tell myself to ignore it, but the more I listened, the more certain I became that Nathan and Jack were watching something special. A wave of shame washed over me. Why was I awake? Why did I have to hear this? My heart was racing and I felt like I was on fire. I put my hands over my face, trying to stop the thoughts that kept invading my mind. This is private, I said to myself. Everyone has seen things like this, even me. But hearing it from her room made me uncomfortable. We had always been close, and I never imagined that I would be in this situation. I didn't want to hear it, but the sound seemed to cling to me, clearer and clearer. I sat up, got out of bed, and quietly opened my door. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I couldn't stay still any longer. I walked quietly down the hall, trying not to make any noise. When I reached Nathan and Jack's door, the sound became so clear that it felt as if the walls had disappeared. I stopped, not knowing what to do. My heart was pounding, and I felt embarrassed, confused, and uncertain. Elbette duzenleme devamedirum. I had always known that these things happened, but hearing it from Nathan and Jack's room was completely different. I bit my lip, unsure if I should go back to my room or stay where I was. Curiosity got the better of me, and I leaned against the door, trying to calm myself. The sound only grew louder, drawing me closer. Suddenly the door swung open and I jumped back in surprise. Jack was standing in front of me, his eyes wide with shock, looking as if he'd been caught in something he shouldn't have been. We stood there for what seemed like an eternity. The silence was unbearable. Jack cleared his throat, trying to break the tension. "Ava, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice nervous, avoiding eye contact. His face was flushed, and I could tell he was as embarrassed as I was. I couldn't look at him either. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could barely get the words out. I was just passing by," I stammered. It didn't sound very convincing, but it was the only thing I could think of at the moment. Just then, the sounds in the room suddenly stopped. Nathan came out from behind Jack, his face as red as Jack's. They both exchanged glances, trying to find the right explanation, but no one said anything. The awkward silence was overwhelming, and I forced an uncomfortable smile, trying to hide my embarrassment. "I was just passing by," I repeated. "Nothing. I'm leaving." I turned and walked away quickly, eager to escape the situation. When I got back to my room, I quickly closed the door and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. My heart was still racing, and a strange, embarrassing feeling washed over me. I couldn't stop replaying the awkward scene in my mind, the image of Jack opening the door and Nathan's expression as he stepped out. The atmosphere between the three of us was thick with tension, and I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept wondering what they were thinking about me at that moment. Maybe they felt as uncomfortable as I did, or maybe even more so. What bothered me most was that I'd overheard something I shouldn't have. It might have been an unfortunate accident, but I feared it would change the way I saw Nathan and Jack, my two closest companions, my brothers, my protectors. I put my hands over my face, trying to block out the negative thoughts, but the more I tried to ignore them, the louder they became. I told myself that this was just an unexpected moment, something that no one wanted to happen. Maybe I was thinking too much, but I couldn't help it. I stood up and paced my room, trying to shake off the unease. "It was just an accident," I muttered to myself, as if trying to convince myself that it wasn't a big deal. But deep down I felt like something had to change. Something had to make this feel normal again. Then I heard a knock at my door. My heart sank. I knew it couldn't be my parents. They didn't usually knock when they needed me. It had to be Nathan or Jack. I took a deep breath and tried to calm my nerves before opening the door. When I did, I found Jack standing there, still looking flustered. His eyes were averted, clearly trying to regain his composure. He scratched his head awkwardly, a shy smile on his lips. "Ava, I'm sorry for what happened earlier. It's not what you think. Nathan and I were just watching a film and maybe the timing wasn't right." I stopped for a moment and looked at him with hesitant eyes. His face was flushed, his gaze uncertain, and I could hear the confusion in his voice. Then Nathan came up behind him, his face showing the same shyness and embarrassment as Jack's. They both tried to find the right words, but the tension was so thick that we couldn't seem to speak. It was as if we were all waiting for someone to break the silence. I realized that if this awkward moment continued, it would only get worse. So I took a deep breath and decided to break the ice. I smiled, feeling a little embarrassed but trying to sound casual. "Come on, I didn't mean to make things awkward," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "Don't look so tense. I was just passing by, really." Jack and Nathan exchanged glances, silently communicating with their eyes. After a moment, Jack sighed and smiled faintly. "Are you sure, Ava? Don't you feel uncomfortable?" he asked, his voice full of uncertainty. I immediately reassured her, trying to ease her worries. "No, I'm fine. In fact, I think I love you both even more," I added quickly, trying to make them laugh. They both looked at me in surprise, and for a moment there was a silent understanding between us. Then I thought of a way to make things less awkward. I took Jack's hand and pointed to Nathan. "Let's go into my room and talk for a bit, shall we?" "Let's call that making up for the awkwardness," I suggested. Both of them were surprised by the suggestion, but after a short pause they nodded. It seemed the only way to break the tension. I smiled and turned and walked to my room, the two of them slowly following behind me. As the three of us sat down on my bed, I decided to lighten the mood with a joke. I looked at Nathan and teased, "So the film was so good that you both lost track of time?" Nathan laughed awkwardly and covered his face with his hands. "Come on, Ava, stop teasing. It's just, we didn't think you'd hear it." "Really?" "I thought you turned it up so I could hear it," I said, raising my eyebrows playfully. This made them both laugh, and for a moment the tension seemed to disappear. After chatting for a while, I felt my curiosity get the better of me. I looked at Nathan and Jack and wondered if I should bring up the thought that had just occurred to me. After a moment's hesitation, I plucked up the courage and asked, "How about we try doing it like in the film?" The words slipped out before I could stop myself, and I immediately regretted them. I wasn't sure how they would react, but curiosity got the better of me. Nathan and Jack turned to look at me with wide eyes, surprised at what I had said. "Are you serious?" Nathan asked in a confused voice. He seemed as if he couldn't believe I was suggesting something so bold. I nodded, trying to keep my expression serious. "I was just curious. It wouldn't hurt to try, would it?" I said, though my voice was fading and I couldn't look them in the eye. "No way," Jack replied quickly, his tone firm, and they both looked away from me. I didn't give up, though, and gently squeezed her hands, trying to calm her down. "Just try it once. I really want to know how it feels." They were silent for a while, and I could see the conflict in their eyes. After a moment, Nathan sighed and said with a look of helplessness, "Okay, but just this once. And we have to keep it a secret. No one can know." The room fell silent. We all just sat there, breathing quietly, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. We began cautiously. Every movement, every action was cautious, but also full of a strange energy. I'm not sure how much time passed, but it felt as if the world around us had disappeared, and it was just the three of us. When it was over, the sun had risen high and filled the room with light. We didn't say anything, we just lay there, breathing evenly. The awkwardness I had feared was completely gone. Instead, I felt a deeper connection between us, as if we had just been through something intense together. We went into the kitchen to prepare lunch, and everything felt strangely natural, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside, I knew that the boundary between us had shifted, and instead of regret, I felt a new connection, one that brought us closer than before. Nathan looked at me with a gentle smile. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. I nodded and returned his smile. "I'm fine, and I think I love you both even more," I replied. The words made me blush, but they held my hand warmly, their eyes full of affection. "We love you too," they said, and we continued to eat. From that day on, our relationship changed in subtle but significant ways. The closeness we had shared was now something else, something deeper. There was no awkwardness, and it was as if an invisible distance between us had disappeared. Every time our eyes met, I could feel a new understanding, a closeness that had never been there before. But deep down, I knew that what we had done was wrong. We had crossed a line, unknowingly breaking the boundaries that society and morality had set. I tell myself it was the impulsive curiosity of youth. I don't try to justify it, but it was our emotions and curiosity that led us down this path. I don't regret it, but sometimes I still feel a vague fear. We don't talk about it anymore, as if there was an unspoken agreement to leave it in the past. The way Nathan and Jack look at me now is different. They are gentler with me, more careful, as if they are afraid of hurting me. And as for me, every time I look into their eyes, my heart races, both excited and afraid. Our curiosity has led us down an unexpected path, and although our bond is stronger than ever, I know that things will never be the same. Looking back, I understand that my impulsive actions have left an indelible mark on our relationship that I can never undo. We crossed a line, guided only by our emotions and curiosity, and although no one else knows, I can't hide it from myself. Every time I think about it, I realize how immature I was, and that realization haunts me. What I've learnt is that curiosity is natural, especially when you're young, but not all curiosity should be indulged, especially when it risks breaking the core principles of life. Boundaries aren't there to limit us, but to protect us from making mistakes that can do lasting damage. Sometimes staying grounded and holding back is the most important thing. Through my story, I want to tell everyone, don't let fleeting curiosity lead you to make the wrong choices. Stop. Think about the consequences before you act. Strong emotions may fade, but their consequences can last forever. Value the relationships you have in life and don't cross boundaries lightly for the sake of temporary desires. True love and lasting relationships are built on respect, understanding, and responsibility for each other. That's the most important thing.